This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Drugs, schools, airplanes, protest marches, everything but Elvis's kitchen sink. Oh wait, no, we have that too. This week on Behind the Headlines. Thank you for joining us on Behind the Headlines. I'm Christopher Blank, news director for WKNO FM, sitting in this week for Eric Barnes. On our distinguished panel of journalists this week, we have the stalwart Bill Dries of the Daily News, Les Smith of Fox 13 News, Jane Roberts, education reporter for the Commercial Appeal, and Jackson Baker, political columnist for the Memphis Flyer. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. This week, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder announced that he was scaling back the prosecutions of minor drug offenses. This has resonated across the country because mandatory sentencing guidelines in many states have led to prisons being overcrowded with nonviolent offenders. I've noticed that many people in the media these days say that this is a civil rights issue. What do you think, Bill?
Well, it's a series of initiatives called Smart on Crime. They're built on the premise, which has been long discussed and debated within the criminal justice system, that in many cases, perhaps we lock up too many people for too long a period of time. And the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder came out this week and said that basically he thinks it not only does not help with the nation's crime problem, but that it contributes to the crime problem. So he's talked about a number of initiatives, and that is a more judicious decision on who to prosecute for drug crimes, who to charge with crimes that have mandatory minimum sentences. Many of those cases are drug cases. And the local angle on this is that many of these decisions are now being made in the federal prosecutor's office here in Memphis for the Western District of Tennessee, which is basically the area between the Mississippi and Tennessee rivers.
I think this is interesting because it's not Congress saying let's not prosecute these low-level drug offenders. It is actually the Attorney General telling his employees, let's not go after these guys.
Right. Congress passed the mandatory minimum sentencing laws, and Holder is not calling for the nation to walk away from those mandatory minimum sentencing. What he's saying is that prosecutors need to take more time to decide who needs to be charged with those crimes that have those sentences.
Mm-hmm. Let me just point out that federal prisons have grown 800% in the last generation due to these policies, due to what we call the drug war. And some people in the media have been saying that this sort of marks the beginning of the end of the war on drugs in America. I'm wondering if anybody else has a thought on it.
Well, I did a piece on this kind of last year involving a Memphian who was busted for crack back in 1985. This was when New Jack City, the movie, came out. Crack came out as the big drug of choice. And a lot of, to smash that movement and try to stop it, the feds decided that they were going to start giving out these harsh penalties. So what happened was that a number of minorities who were into the crack cocaine and pretty much dominated the crack cocaine market, when they were caught, they were slapped with incredible sentences. One Memphian I talked to last year got 27 years for less than 2 grams of crack. And he served 18 of those years in federal prison. And it was just amazing.
And charged with what was basically a nonviolent offense. Holder made a distinction here between violent felons in the drug trade who are part of cartels or drug organizations and people who are basically street dealers who have not committed a violent crime. And that's an important distinction to make in the whole initiatives that we're talking about. I mean, this is basically up to every U.S. Attorney's office across the country to come up with a plan on how to make these kind of decisions.
And we do know that there are stiffer sentences on black males than there are on anyone else in drug prosecutions. Yeah. So in Memphis, we're a city that's 60% African American. I know this might actually have an impact on just getting people who have been arrested of these crimes getting them work, because a simple drug conviction can really ruin your life for the rest of your life.
It is inevitable. This action by the Attorney General is an inevitable middle stage to the ultimate liberation of all of the states from these oppressive drug laws. Because we've got states now where it's legal to purchase, smoke marijuana. And a lot of these people who've been convicted have been convicted for selling marijuana. Did big time, hard time. That belongs to a dark age I think we're getting away from, and very quickly, and the Attorney General has recognized this.
Well, speaking of civil rights issues, we are coming up on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yeah.
Les, you've been talking to a number of people who actually attended that original march. It must be wonderful hearing their memories of that event.
It's wonderful hearing their memories. And again, this year, 2013, presents us with what Al Sharpton is calling the intersection of history. So many historical events, the 50th anniversary, Medgar Evers' death, Kennedy's assassination later on this year, Medgar Evers' assassination. But the March on Washington, August 28, 1963, was something that was so memorable. Of course, a number of the people who went there, like Maxine Smith and Ben Hooks, are no longer with us. But there was an original group that went up there that had 58 people that were NAACP with the core group that went up, and a number of other people from Memphis. And it's something, a lasting memory that they will take with them, because there was so much on the line then. But now, 50 years later, there's obviously a diminished view, I think, of what that time meant and what that march meant, with 200,000 people coming to Washington. It was the largest at that time demonstration that had ever taken place in Washington. But succeeding generations, well, everything that was on the table back then, from everything from $2 minimum wage they were looking for. Of course, the Civil Rights Act had not been passed. It was stalled in Congress. And Kennedy, at first, President Kennedy, had asked Dr. King and the others, don't do this, because this can only be detrimental. Because the South was solid. Southern senators were against the Civil Rights Bill, and it was going nowhere. And Kennedy was so fearful that something could happen that could tip the scales the wrong way, and it wouldn't get through. But of course, it was a glorious, glorious time.
Good point. Good point.
Les, I want to bring that around to what we're talking about, because it was the March on Washington that really pushed the Civil Rights Act, and then a couple years later, the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act has come up recently in Supreme Court issues. Throughout southern states, they're passing these laws requiring voter IDs. And many Republicans have widely said that the idea is to make it more difficult for certain people to cast their votes. Many people who vote Democratic. Is that still a concern with people today, and some of the people who are thinking about these issues that Martin Luther King were talking about?
Well, if it isn't, it should be. Because a lot of people feel the clock is being turned back by individual states' legislation. Certainly the rejection of the Civil Rights Act, a very key part of that platform, the Voting Rights Act rather, that's just was detrimental too. But the thing is that we must light a fire under the young folks. That's, I hate to use the term young folks, but that's what you feel. These are the ones who are going to have to motivate this march. There's an opportunity to do so. The National Civil Rights Museum is taking a bus in conjunction with the NAACP. That will leave out on the 22nd, return on the 25th. Unfortunately, there are two fragmented ceremonies. One on the 24th with Al Sharpton. He'll be leading that. And then the regular day, commemorative day, will be on the 28th with President Obama. Kind of hardly believe that both groups are going to get together at the same time. So we won't have the majesty that we had 50 years ago of a large crowd, but maybe we will still have the spirit that motivated those people 50 years ago to come.
Now, are you going to be on that bus, or are you going to be attending the march with them, or is there going to be a big group of people going? And how can somebody get involved with that?
All you got to do to get involved with it is call the National Civil Rights Museum. They can put you in touch with Heritage Tours, and then you book it. As far as hopefully a lot of Memphians coming, well, there were 58 that went back 50 years ago. If we get 58 this time around, we'll be lucky.
Okay, so, all right, so not as many, but hopefully
the spirit will be there.
The spirit will be there.
Yes.
So I want to bring up another issue that I consider this a civil rights issue, but it's just personally Jackson Baker, and that is that we live in a city that is where 27% of the people live in the poverty level, and we can't get a cheap airline ticket in this town. I certainly can't. I want to know why we have some of the highest airline prices, ticket prices in the country, and what is Nashville doing to help solve that problem?
Well, this makes for an interesting segue because, as Les pointed out, President Kennedy was not very keen on the March on Washington to begin with. President Reagan was not very keen on signing the proclamation making a national holiday for Martin Luther King. And President Johnson was certainly very antsy about his activities against the Vietnam War. But basically what Martin Luther King left unfinished, what he saw as his unfinished mission, was economic rights as civil rights, and that's exactly what you're talking about. We have a situation whereby we're being squeezed here in Memphis by number of flights out of here diminishing, the prices, the rates for those flights increasing, and we're trying to be a tourist city. It makes it very difficult. Attorney General Robert Cooper in Nashville is coming to the rescue because he has joined with 4 or 5 other states in the Justice Department's antitrust action that's being taken against American Airlines and U.S. Airways. That's the latest merger that's in the offing. And again, the Justice Department is trying to halt it. General Cooper here in Tennessee is trying to halt it, and he specifically sees the damage it can inflict on Memphis and Nashville and Chattanooga and Knoxville, all the major metropolitan centers, because U.S. Airways, which is I think all of us know, has been a kind of a fallback way of getting to the East Coast when Delta began shrinking its flights. It would shrink them, it would virtually disappear in the merger. That's what people fear, which means that competition would suffer greatly, rates would rise, and we wouldn't get service. He sees that as a civil rights issue. The Attorney General of Tennessee does, and I'm all for it.
Right.
What happens to the litigation remains to be seen, but I think that this is a problem, not just in Tennessee, but a lot of other places too. And I think a lot of people begin to see exactly what you laid out, that economics equals civil rights under certain circumstances. This is an economic right that's really reducing our pursuit of happiness.
It seems to me like there are people who want to keep government out of private business, and that the market should, this idea of the market driving the ticket prices. But in the case of Memphis, it's almost like we want government intervention.
Well, Mr. Sherman back there in the days of Teddy Roosevelt thought otherwise, and so did President Roosevelt back then. The government does have a role in making sure that competition, which is the lifeblood of capitalism, it can actually flourish. And that's what we're talking about here.
And we're talking about, come on, Southwest Airlines. Please come, please help out.
I think it's an economic issue beyond just ticket prices, because companies in Memphis find it very difficult to do their work and expand if they cannot move around from Memphis.
And again, we are a tourist center, trying to be.
That's right, and we've lost convention business. A number of conventionaires last year with the FOCART, for instance, that was 6,000 people. They stopped their convention last year. It was their final year. They're going to Kansas City because the air rates were just too much. And so many of their people were, from Europe, or from Ireland and other places. They were coming here. Not anymore.
And I think, which company would have their corporate headquarters in Memphis now with the situation. Who would
Yeah.
move here now?
If International Paper had to do all over again right now, would they do it?
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, it's tenuous.
So it's important to get those ticket prices lowered so that we are able to keep businesses here in this city as well. Jackson, you just wrote a column about Sidney Chisholm and the ethics complaint. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is one of those interesting situations where it's either a political issue with legal overtones or a legal issue with political overtones. But Terry Rowland, the very outspoken Millington Republican on the county commission, began the year looking for a way to keep Mayor Luttrell from raising the tax rate and from increasing the budget, because the mayor had indicated he would have to. Luttrell, of course, is a Republican, and a lot of Republicans thought that was called for, but Rowland and Republicans on the commission didn't think so. And what Terry did, he looked at a couple of Democrats on the commission he thought were likely votes to raise the tax rate and increase the budget. And one of them is Melvin Burgess, who is employed by Memphis City Schools and continues to be employed by the Unified District. And the other was Sidney Chisholm, who is a daycare center in South Memphis. And he received his center received what are called wraparound funds. Those are support funds, medical, dental checkups, and so forth. So Rowland said, look, we passed an ethics ordinance in 2009 against conflict of interest. This is a conflict of interest. Neither one of these gentlemen should be able to vote on the budget to fund themselves, basically. Well, the county attorney decided that Burgess was off the hook because his employment preceded the votes on the budget. But and he also disclosed his involvement. Sidney Chisholm had not disclosed his involvement, whether out of negligence or whatever. So he was on the hook there. He maintains, however, that his interest in the county funding is indirect, not direct. He doesn't profit from it directly. In any case, that case is before an ethics commission that was appointed a couple of years ago. It's first case. It hasn't had any cases. This is going to be a precedent. And the lawyer appointed by the county attorney to present the case, Rowland's case, since he's a county commissioner, is saying that state law needs to be involved in this. State law is a little harsher than the county ordinance. County ordinance says you cannot profit directly from something you're voting on. State law says directly or indirectly, and if the state gets involved, it gets to be a big issue. They're meeting at the end of this month, and will probably render a verdict on that.
Excellent. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. One of our local television stations this week reported that Memphis is long overdue for an earthquake. And now I don't know about that, but I do think that there's a lot of tectonic stress built up over the school system in this city and county. And Jane, I want to go to you, who covers education, to talk about, we're in the second week now of the unified school district. How are things going over there?
Well, I think that the most visible problems still are transportation issues. And we saw this week that the person who was the head of transportation for the unified district retired early, just came in to work one day and said, I'm going to retire. She had been a Shelby County employee, director of transportation. And, I think that these problems are sort of get right to the heart of what the angst is about the unified district, and it has been compelling and exacerbated really because when people call the district offices, there are so many people calling they cannot get through. So I mean, I can really feel for people that there's nothing more frustrating in the morning when the bus hasn't come and it's the third and the fourth day, or it's late at night, supper time, and your children still aren't home and you don't know where they are and you cannot get anyone on the phone. That was happening last week. I expect it's better now. The district did announce this week that it has hired a chief of communications, which is sort of a new thing to have a chief of communications. And we get the impression from the title that this person will have more responsibility, maybe be part of the inner core more. It's Emily Yellen, who's Memphis family.
That's interesting.
Who is ironically the author of the book Your Call Is Not That Important to Us?
Right. She
It's a
wrote-
book about customer service.
Right. So that's interesting. That's very interesting. And from the media point of view, the former Memphis City Schools did not have a good reputation for being responsive to public inquiry.
Not
I think
at
it had
all.
gotten better, but
Yeah, it got better. Yeah.
What, was the school district just not prepared for the amount of phone calls that were going to come in?
they tried something new with the transportation this year. They used a hybrid. You know, let's all acknowledge that this is 1 year and then things change next year.
Right.
So they kept the former Memphis City School drivers in place, and they kept the Shelby County system in place. They enlarged the Shelby County system, which meant that some of the Memphis drivers went to the Shelby County side. And in talking to the drivers, they say that the routes were changed at the last minute and they didn't get a chance to do a dry run. And so there were some problems. Now, I think there are many fewer problems, but it's one of those very tangible things that makes people lose heart.
You know, but the fact remains, there's a lot of people that really believe this is one of those big issue topics they should have attacked early on. They knew this was coming. They knew busing was going to be a problem. And yet again, they put off a big issue thing almost until the end. And I think that's why a lot of people feel like, oh my goodness, you could have done this. This should be done and on the drawing board and done right.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's pretty rote, and we imagine at home that it's fairly easy to plan and execute. So I think people don't understand.
In a way, I guess it's better that it's something wrong with the busing as opposed to something wrong with some technology glitch where the computers crash and it erases everyone's diplomas.
But on a whole, I mean, other than those who came in and are looking for anything to go wrong, and I think we know who those people are, but it's worked pretty well.
Right.
So
The
far.
IT system, I think, has been quite marvelous. Now the teachers got their first paychecks, which added a huge load to the pay system, and that went off fairly fine. So
The irony is, by the time they get this thing down, they'll have to get out of it next year.
It's- yeah,
cease
that's the
to
sad
exist.
part, really.
you know?
Yeah.
Well, today is a very special day, at least for us here in Memphis. Today is August 16th, and it is the 36th anniversary of the day that the King of Rock and Roll passed away at his house in Graceland, where in Memphis we celebrate this event with a wailing and gnashing of teeth and a lighting of candles. I was at Graceland last night, as you can tell from the bags under my eyes, walking to the grave with my fellow Elvis fans.
on broken glass.
Right. And now there's been rumors lately that Kanye West was going to buy Graceland for Kim Kardashian and turn the Jungle Room into a nursery. But that is not true, I've been told by authorities
Hopefully
at
not,
Graceland. I also asked them, what's going to happen when these legions of fans start dying off? Because here we are. It's that Elvis would have been in his late 70s at this point. And they said not to worry about that at all, because most Elvis fans that show up to Graceland are in their 30s or under 30 years old, and there's just new legions
New generations
of fans.
all the
Yeah,
time.
they've indoctrinated their children into it. See that?
Indoctrinated. I like that word.
I wonder if
describe
they will
Elvis
be as
fans.
fervid as the first generation.
Right.
Well, they seem to be. Year by year, the crowds behave much the same way, but the same veneration on the candlelight vigil, you know?
And now, have you guys been to the candlelight vigil?
Sure.
You
Yeah,
have?
once.
You have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you've seen
The
people.
outpouring of emotion, and it's very
Very
sincere.
solid.
It is.
It really is.
Right. And it's very spontaneous.
Yeah.
The sort of
Yeah.
shrines that are created.
And let me. And you mentioned shrine. I actually am a maker of an Elvis shrine. I have a portable Elvis shrine that I like to take to the vigil, and I like my candles. We're looking at it right now. This is my artistic conception of Elvis lying in state, surrounded by images of his life, and it gets people taking pictures out at Graceland.
You use your idle time well.
My idle time.
Idle.
I appreciate the pun.
Yeah.
I want to say a little self-promotion very quickly. I did a story this week on WKNO FM about this album. This is an Elvis at Stax. A few people know that he
I've heard
actually
about
recorded an album at Stax Records. And it wasn't the album that people thought it was going to be. He didn't cover Soul Man. He didn't cover Otis Redding. He just ended up doing Elvis songs. So something to think about if you're a fan of local music. That the album that might have been,
Could have been.
but turned into something
There were actually
completely different.
two albums, two sessions.
Yeah, two sessions.
Two sessions
One
and
in
two albums
July,
back then.
one in
right?
December. I
Yeah.
think.
Right. Now you are an old school Elvis fan.
Older than I usually admit to these days, but I once lived next door to Elvis Presley on Lamar Avenue. That's one of his residences, as any fan can tell you. And it was at a time when his parents were not used to having their own telephone. It was their first house, actually. They came over to our house to use the telephone. I met Elvis Presley in the hallway as a kid, using my phone.
Wow.
Here's a picture, since this is one of my shrines, if we can get focused on that.
Okay.
That is a photograph taken by the late Robert Dye, whose son continues to be an excellent photographer. He was a great photographer of Elvisiana. And this was a picture taken of the famous Rustwood Park concert. You can see Elvis there. This dude right here is me.
This guy here. Let's get that. This little head right here, back in the corner. It's a great picture of you,
Barely
Jackson.
made that frame. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's terrific. It gets your good side. I think.
Yeah. Well, he gets a side anyhow.
Does everybody remember where they were when Elvis died?
I didn't.
Oh, sure.
What were you doing?
I was at Memphis State ironically enough, talking to a fellow about things that happened out of Memphis and saying there's Elvis Presley. He said, by the way, did you hear he died? That's how I heard about it.
Disc jockey in Jefferson City, Missouri. Heard about it.
I was getting ready to be a senior in high school in rural Minnesota.
And I was getting ready to play with some Legos or something like that. Well, that's all the news we have time for today. Let me thank our guests, Jane Roberts, Les Smith, Jackson Baker, and Bill Dries. I'm Christopher Blank, and this is Behind the Headlines. We'll see you next week.